Hello, thank you for joining. My name is Josiah Thibodeau. In this episode, we are going to be talking about the idea of who do you want to become? Now, that may sound strange because this is something we generally ask school-age children. Who do you want to become when you grow up? What do you want to become when you grow up? An astronaut, a doctor, an athlete, whatever. But when we get to adulthood, we kind of stop asking ourselves, who do we want to become? And we get in a place where we begin to almost stagnate within ourselves and who we are because we solidify the identity that we've accepted for ourselves based on the experiences that we've had as we are young and growing up into early adulthood. And then from there, we tend to just kind of shut off that whole train of thought of who do you want to become? Can I become somebody else? Can I do something else in life? And many times we get kind of just stuck there. We get trapped there. We start to think that this is just how life is. This is who we are. This is my lot in life. This job that I'm working is probably going to be something that I'm doing for however long, or at least this type of industry. And many times it's hard to shift industries. And that makes sense because you have to learn, new skills and tools and things like that to be able to make some of those different shifts. So it's easy to stay just kind of where you are. It's easier to just stay in that same vein that you've gotten used to. But when it comes to changing your life, when it comes to going from the version of yourself that you are to that next version that you want, you have to start to think about this idea of who is it that you actually want to become, though. Right? Does that make sense? I mean, if we think about it, we're constantly changing. We're changing all the time. And the way that you thought in your teens is different than what you thought in your 20s, which is different than what you thought in your 30s, different than your 40s, and on and on and on it goes until the day that you die. And so some of this is, where is it that you actually want to go? And with where you are right now, how do you want to get to that place? Are you formulating some sort of plan to go from this is where I am today, this is where I want to be, and to get there, I have to change certain aspects about myself. So you have to get to that point of what is it that you're going to change about yourself to become that person that you want to become. But you also have to think about who is it that you want to become in the first place. And I'm not talking about being the next billionaire, having a huge house or a nicer car or whatever it is, materialistically speaking, or anything necessarily outside of you. I'm talking more about the internal aspects of who you want to be as an individual and as a person, how you want to relate to the world. So, for instance, if you feel like you deal with a lot of anger and you want to get over dealing with anger, how do you become that person who's more peaceful? How do you become that person who's just more ease with life, who is more joyful and loving within life? If you are dealing with depression, anxiety, bitterness, resentment, any of these deep emotions that tend to lean towards the negative side, at least we see them as more negative emotions, how do we move from that state to a different state that is more pleasant, more positive? Now, it doesn't mean that we just necessarily get rid of all the bad or difficult things going on in our life, the struggles that we have. It doesn't mean those just go away. But how do we learn to live in a state of equanimity despite what's going on around us? So when we're thinking about who do we want to become, it's more than just, I want to be a business person, or I want to be an actor or a musician or a lawyer or a doctor. It's beyond that. It's who do you want to become internally? And then as you begin to change your life internally, you'll begin to relate differently to the world externally, and that will begin to propel you forward in a direction that you're most likely wanting to go. So, as we go through this today, just kind of keep this in mind of just this idea of who is it that you want to become, what is it that you're trying to attain, and the thoughts of what do you need to do, what shifts do you need to make mentally, emotionally within yourself in order to get there. So for me, I'll just tell you, just very quick about my kind of situation was I dealt with depression and anxiety for a very, very long time, way longer than I needed to. But part of the problem was I didn't understand where I was in regards to depression and anxiety. For the longest time, I didn't even know I was depressed because I was so used to the feeling of depression, and the way that it came upon me, it was just this slow creeping feeling. It's not like just boom, all of a sudden, oh, I'm just depressed. I'm so depressed right now and I don't know what's going on. It was this slow incremental steps that I took to get to this place where I was dealing with full-blown depression and suicide. So it's not like, one day I woke up and now I'm just depressed. It was this long trajectory of beginning to adopt the identity around depression, around anxiety, to begin to build that into my internal programming of saying I am a depressed person, but without really understanding what's going on. So by the time I realized that I was depressed, many years had gone by. But in those years where I didn't realize I was depressed, I just thought this is how people felt. This just feels normal. I didn't match up to what you would see when people talked about depression, commercials about depression. There still are a lot of advertisements for SSRIs, for pharmaceutical medication to help with depression, right? But whenever I watched those commercials, they never fit the feeling or the situations that I was dealing with. So I didn't think that, oh, maybe I'm depressed. I just thought, well, this is just how life is. Everybody must feel the same way as I do. And then as I went along, I started to understand more and more. No, not everybody feels this way. This is not something that people deal with regularly. A large majority of people don't deal with it. But then there's a large majority of people who do. But it was coming to this place of beginning to finally understand, okay, I'm living in this cycle of depression and anxiety. And then getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't want to stay here. What do I need to do to change? So I tried a bunch of things. I tried so many different avenues to try to figure out how to overcome depression. And it started off rocky and it started off slow. And it started off with taking medication and trying to, think that this medication is what is going to be the thing that saves me. But it wasn't. And for most people, whatever your situation is, whatever you're dealing with, there's a lot of times where you're going to think, oh, if I do this one thing, this is going to be the answer that I need. And maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So you can't just say, oh yeah, this is it, and then put all your hopes into this one thing, because you might have to take multiple avenues to begin to overcome whatever you're dealing with, to get to the point where you can change your life for the better, become that person that you want to become. So, for me, I had to go through different stages and different shifts. My mindset had to change in different ways. And that took a lot of time from me because I was just floundering around. Growing up, nobody talked about depression, at least in the circle, in the area where I grew up. So that just wasn't even something that was on the radar. And as I got older, I started to hear more and understand more. And now with social media and the internet and just the access that we have to with all the information, it's much easier for people to understand, well, I think I'm dealing with depression, or I'm dealing with anxiety, or I'm dealing with whatever it is. But it's something that you can probably more easily diagnose on your own, as opposed to having to go and talk to somebody and be like, well, yeah, you're depressed, because you can see all these things on the internet. But it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you know what that is, that now this is how I get rid of it. So there's this journey or this progression in these steps that you have to take to get to the point where you're able to overcome. But you have to start with that idea of, who do you want to become in the first place? If I'm dealing with depression, who do I want to become? I want to become somebody who's joyful. I want to become somebody who is at peace and ease with life, who doesn't feel like they're just struggling all the time because of whatever circumstance or situation that rise up, or relationships that you have causing you to feel a certain way. So these are the things that I want to try to get to. How do I get to that place? So when you can start to break it down a little bit more like that, it can become a little bit easier to start to really understand, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, and then finding that path to get there. The other thing that you have to think about, because a lot of people don't want to change. Change is hard. Change is difficult. Change is something that requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of work. And so you also have to think about this idea of, do you want to be stagnant water or do you want to be flowing water? Because if you're refusing to change, you're more like a stagnant pool of water, which eventually it either dries up because there's, nothing new, no new source coming in, or it is a breeding ground for disease. There's just nothing there that can really live except for bacteria and things that cause diseases, different types of pathogens. And so you have to think about, well, if I stay in this place and I'm not working towards a new or better ideal of who I am or who I could be, what does that mean for my life? Now, it doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to have a bad life, but are you comfortable with just accepting who you are right now and staying that way until the day that you die? And if you are, great. There's no judgment or anything here, because maybe you've worked through a lot of stuff and you're in a place where you feel really good about yourself. I mean, for me, I feel like I constantly have things that I can do to change, to try to be a better person. Try to show up as a better father, as a better person within the world, with friends and strangers that I meet, treating them in ways that I think that we should all be treated, and trying to hold myself to a higher standard, because I think it's important. If we want to change the world, we have to be willing to change ourselves first. If you're flowing water, you're constantly changing, you're constantly moving, you're constantly going into new places. And this doesn't necessarily mean traveling around the world and doing things like that. You're going within new places within yourself, and you're revealing, around each bend of that river, of that internal river of emotions, thoughts, and feelings within your life, you're finding new things. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You're constantly finding these new things that maybe you need to address or work on. And so as you're flowing through, you start to see, there's this thing here. I need to kind of maybe work on that as I go by. And then, you keep going around the bends of the river, but you're constantly moving and flowing. It's much harder for you to stagnate or to have, I guess more detrimental type issues in your life that would come up, because you're working on those things. You're trying to overcome them rather than just succumbing to the fact that, I'm an angry person. I think I'm just going to be this way the rest of my life, and look out, world, because here I come. I am just a force to be reckoned with, and I just don't even care anymore. Like, just get out of my way. Do you want to live that way? I mean, I've been angry before, and it's not a pleasant feeling. Everybody's had the experience of anger, and it isn't necessarily a pleasant feeling. Now, there are, I think, moments of what we might call righteous anger, where you feel angry because, some form of justice is not being taken or whatever the situation is, and there's a place for it. But if you constantly feel that way, it probably isn't a state that you want to live in for the rest of your life. But are you willing to do the work that you need to do to change how you feel, to move beyond whatever, deep emotional life that you have that you don't want to live with? Are you willing to do the work to be able to change? And that is being that idea of flowing water. That's the idea of being okay with, I don't know what's going to be around the next bend. I don't necessarily know how I'm even going to get to that next bend. But what I do know is I'm not going to stay where I am right now. I'm not going to just continue to allow myself to stay in this place where I am constantly feeling this sense of frustration or sadness or grief or hatred, whatever's going on within you. I'm not willing to stay there. I'm going to start moving forward anyway to figure out how I overcome these feelings, these thoughts, this cycle that I'm trapped in. So we have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to learn how to take control of how you feel, how you act, how you respond to the world and to situations around you. You have to be willing to go in and say, in order for me to be a better version of myself, I need to be willing to take charge of my thoughts and my emotions. I need to be able to go in and make these incremental shifts as I work through the different situations and scenarios that I find myself in. And a lot of times, we look at the external factor. We say, well, this thing is happening out here. That's what's causing my problem. But the reality is, most of the time, what's actually going on is internal, not external. So are we willing to go in and try to make those incremental shifts internally, learning how we act and react to the world, how we respond to the world, how we think about the world, how we feel about the world, how we feel about others, how we feel about ourselves, what we think about ourselves, what we tell ourselves. We have to be willing to go inward and start to work on that aspect of ourselves. And as we do that, that eventually begins to change our outer world. But we have to be willing to go inward first. And part of the problem is we're not necessarily taught how to do this. Most people aren't raised with their parents being like, hey, you know what? If you do internal work, you are going to be able to save yourself a lot of trouble, because they were never taught, and their parents were never taught, and their parents were never taught. Most people are just trying to figure it out as we go, right? We feel like we're just being strung along for the ride, and sometimes we have these great insights. It's like, oh my gosh, why was I doing that for so long? I could have bypassed all this pain and strife and trouble and whatever it is that you might have dealt with. And like, if I would have just done this thing. And then we start to, slowly teach maybe our children or friends and talk about it with other people and tell them, hey, this is what I dealt with for a long time, and I did this and it really, really helped. And people are, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll try that. But we're all on our own journey. And, some people might hear you and be like, oh, I'll try that. And they try it for a day. Nothing happens. They just give up. They forget about it, whatever. And so we have this long history of people just not really knowing how to handle certain issues, because we don't necessarily know how to go internally to deal with those. And that's why psychology has just, there's so many different aspects of psychology, so many different fields of psychology trying to figure this out. Right? Trying to figure out, how do we act and respond and behave as people, and how can we get to the point where we are doing it in a way that is beneficial for the human race, not just for one individual or corporations or whatever. How do we do it so that we can heal ourselves as a human race? And as we begin to heal ourselves, it pours out into the world. So, it's you probably weren't taught how to do some of this internal work. And so this idea of who do you want to become can seem almost like a monstrous task, an insurmountable obstacle that you have to tackle. And because of that, you might just think, you know what, I don't even know if that's something that I can do. So what do? We talk ourselves out of it. We decide, I don't think that I can do that. So you have to get to the point where you decide, it doesn't matter how long this takes. It doesn't matter what I go through. I'm not going to talk myself out of trying to reach this ideal of who it is that I want to be. You have to stick with it. You have to be willing to play the long game and stay in that place so that you can eventually begin to move forward in life. Now, really the biggest obstacle that you're going to face is yourself. The biggest obstacle that you are going to have to overcome is you. Many times we think that it's out there. You probably think that your real issues are your family members, your friends, your work environment, the government, the idiot drivers on the road that don't know how to drive and you're constantly frustrated with them, the people at the grocery store, all these different external situations or circumstances that seem to make your life more difficult. It's them. It's all out there. It's them. The reality is the biggest thing holding back is you. You're holding yourself back because most of the time we're just too busy blaming everybody else. And we get to the point where it's like, this is very difficult to do. Like, I'm trying to change who I am now to become this person that I think would be a better version of myself, but it's difficult and it's hard and it takes work and I'm not seeing the results that I want. It's not happening fast enough. I just don't think it's going to work for me. And so you give up. You have these limiting beliefs that come in and say, you know what? You don't have what it takes. You're not worthy of love. You're not worthy of peace. You did this thing in the past. You hurt these people. You said these things. You don't deserve to have a better life. You don't deserve to be considered a better person, whether, somebody else is considering that for you or you're considering it for yourself. You don't deserve that. So we allow limiting beliefs to come in and hold us back. But the truth is, really what's holding you back is you. A lot of times it's fear holding you back. I have fear in my life that's still holding me back from things. There are things that I deal with and go through where I'm just afraid because it requires me to maybe put myself out there, to change a certain belief system that I have and a pattern that I've had that I've held for so long. And it's almost like this feeling of, well, if I let go of that, then who am I? If I don't believe this anymore, I don't accept this anymore, then what does that mean about me as a person? Because I've held on to this belief system for so long. I've held on to these thoughts about who I am for so long, and these things have informed me of what the world is and how it works. And if I let go of that, then I don't necessarily know who I am and how the world works and what I think about it. And that's okay. You have to be okay with that. Because once you're able to let some of those things go, once you're able to release some of those things that you hold on to, you open up and you make room for new experiences, new thought patterns, new life to be able to come in, and you're able to take that information and start to transform your life into the life that you want to have, into that person that you want to be. Does that make sense? Are you following along with that? So instead of continuing to hold yourself back, instead of continuing to say, I don't think I have what it takes, or I'm not worthy of this life that I want to live. I'm not worthy of the love, the peace, the joy, whatever it is that you're trying to aim for, which, me personally, I believe that we're all aiming for peace, joy, and love. Those are some of the most basic foundational pieces that we're all striving for in life, but we tie them up and wrap them up and put them in these presents that look like something else. It's a perfect relationship. It's, being that entrepreneur or that athlete or musician or whatever. And now I receive accolades from people, and that's my source of love. I feel good about myself now because I'm getting this feedback from others telling me how good I am. That's just a form of us wanting love. And so I think that's what we're all after. But, it may be a little bit different in how we get there and how we think about it and the way that we look at it. But we have to be willing to let go of some things to open up room for new experiences, new thoughts, new ideas to come in and begin to change us for the better. So we have to be willing to stick with it. One of the other major issues is that we just give up prematurely. It takes too long for us to see the result that we want, so boom, I'm done. I don't even want to keep trying because it's taking too long. Simon Sinek has a great kind of monologue or thing that he's discussed before where he talks about the idea of going to the gym. And this is relating to this idea that we give up early. We don't stick with it long enough to be able to see the results, right? So he's talking about this idea of going to the gym. And he says when you go to the gym, the first day and you work out and you come home and you look into the mirror and look in the mirror, nothing's changed. You can't physically see any change. You cannot perceive it. Now, the truth is something has changed, albeit it's pretty small. It's not a major change. If you go and you lift weights, you're tearing your muscle a little bit. Maybe you burn some calories. But it's at such a small scale that there's no way for you to physically be able to see that change. And so what do? We go to the gym the next day, we work out, we come home, we stare at the mirror, nothing's changed. We do it again the next day, nothing's changed. And this can go on and on. But he says at some point we don't know when, we don't know the exact time, but there is a point where you come home and you stand in front of the mirror and you're like, hey, there's a change there. Something's different. I look different. Now, maybe you start to feel the difference before you even see the difference. There's the possibility of that. But if you're just taking it and breaking it down to that physical aspect, there comes a point in time where you look in the mirror and you notice there's a difference about me. I've either lost some weight and I can see that, or I've put on some muscle and I can see that. But there's a perceived difference in what I used to look like compared to what I look like now. The problem is most people, will give up before they get to that point of seeing the difference. They'll have some excuse. There will be something that comes in and it distracts you and pulls you away. It's too hard to do, so you just stop going. That's why so many people give up on their New Year's resolution when they join the gym. They go to the gym, they work out for a little bit, a few days, a few weeks, and then they quit because they're not seeing the results. They're not seeing the changes that they deem necessary for them to continue to do that workout. Or they start to get distracted. Or they just fall back into their old programming because they haven't spent enough time rewiring the circuitry needed in order for them to continue on with that new lifestyle. So when it comes down to it, when you are trying to change yourself from this person to become this other person that you see or have that ideal that, hey, I want to be this version of myself. How do I get there? Usually you don't get there because of you. You don't get there because you quit too early, because you don't take the time needed, to expend the energy needed to get to that place. Think about it like planting a seed. If you plant a seed in the ground, you leave it overnight, and the next morning you go and you dig it up, is that seed going to grow? And then you plant it back in the ground, next morning you come out, you don't see anything, so you dig it up. Is that seed going to grow? It's not going to grow. You could keep doing that till the end of your life, and that seed will never grow because it doesn't have the time to germinate and actually begin to go through the process of breaking out of the shell, sending that sprout up to get to the surface, to get the sunlight, and for you to see that something's going on and to keep watering it. And it'll never get there. But if you leave it in the ground and you just continue to water it, you continue to take care of it, make sure that nothing is disturbing it, the birds aren't coming in and eating it, that it stays covered by the dirt, eventually that seed's going to sprout. And after a certain amount of time, it will turn into whatever it is that you planted. If you're looking for some sort of fruit from that thing, it's going to take a while. So we have to go in with that mindset that, you know what? I want to become this person. I want to upgrade my version, my software, to become this better version that I can see for myself. And I have to understand, you have to understand, that there's going to be a growing process. There is going to be a process of potentially even tearing down so that you can rebuild. There's going to be time that is needed to go from where you are now to the place that you want to be. And you have to be willing to give yourself that time. Depending on what you're working on, it might only take a few weeks. You know, they say that you can build a habit within 21 days, 60 days, anywhere in between, or sometimes even longer. It just depends on what you're doing. It depends on the habit you're trying to build. It depends on what it is that you're trying to do with your life. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to give it 21 days. And if nothing happens in that 21 days and I'm just giving up, it's obviously not working. So I'm just going to go back to how I was living and how everything was before. You can't do that. You have to be willing to say, I'm going to give this 6 months. I'm going to give this a year. I'm going to give this 5 years. I'm going to give this 10 years. You have to be willing to put in the time and the energy to do that. Now, I think there are ways that you can shorten that time. I think there are ways that you can reduce the amount of time it takes to go from point A to point B. But it's still sticking with it. It's still doing the work necessary to shorten that time. So the main thing I kind of want you to think of is stop blaming whatever circumstances or situations are going on around you. Start taking responsibility for yourself and start understanding that the only reason you're not going from where you want to be to the place that you want to be is because of you. You're holding yourself back in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean that you don't have obstacles out there. It doesn't mean that you don't have people that you're contending with. You know, if you're looking for a promotion and your boss doesn't like you, it's going to be hard to get a promotion. I'm not saying that you don't have obstacles that you're facing. But when it comes down to it, the issue really resides within you. You might have a boss who's a jerk. How are you going to overcome that? How are you going to deal with that? Are you going to continue to think negative thoughts about this person? Which if you do, it's most likely going to hold you back because they're going to pick up on that negativity that you're giving off. There's this whole cycle. I mean, we are very, very sophisticated beings that can pick up on so many small, minute details that we can't even think about it consciously. We have about 11 million bits of information coming at us every second, and we can process about 50 of them. Consciously process it. Now, subconsciously, we're taking it all in, we're hearing it all, we're seeing it all, but we can't necessarily put together all the pieces of the puzzle right then and there. But that's why we pick up on different cues. So if your boss is a jerk and you don't like your boss, he's picking up on those cues. You have to change yourself. So a couple of things that you can do if you want to change yourself for the better, and you want to begin to go on this journey with this idea of who do you want to become. The first thing that you need to do is you have to become conscious of the thoughts that you think every single day. That's the first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is you have to become conscious of your feelings every single day. You have to know what you're thinking about and you have to know what you're feeling. You have to become aware of that. Carl Jung said, and I believe I said this in the last episode, but Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This means that whatever's going on subconsciously is directing your life until you become conscious of that subconscious programming. That's why people deal with depression, they deal with anxiety, they deal with grief, they deal with bitterness and resentment for so long. And the list doesn't stop there. Whatever it is that you're dealing with. It could be jealousy. It could be laziness. It could be envy. There's so many different things. But we deal with those things so long because they have become these subconscious programs that we don't even realize are running in the background. And those things are directing our lives. When I was dealing with anxiety, there was a point in time where I had to go to the DMV so that I could update my license and get a new license. Everything was fine. I pull up in front of the DMV, everything's fine. I get out of the car, everything's fine. I went to a smaller town that was still kind of connected to the county that I was in so that I could get through faster. And thank God I did because nobody was there. But what happened is as soon as I grabbed the handle of the door and I opened the door, boom, flooded with anxiety. There's one person, right at the front counter grabbing a ticket and immediately being called over to a booth because there's literally nobody there. There's one person taking a driving test, and then there's like 5 employees. And for some reason, I have no idea why, I was slammed with anxiety. I could feel it just bursting in my chest. But I'd been working on becoming aware of what's going on, becoming aware of my thoughts and becoming aware of my feelings. Instead of what would have happened in the past, I would have known what was going on. I just would have freaked out. I would have felt, weird and anxious, and I don't know why. But I caught it, and I was like, why in the world are you feeling this way right now? There's literally no reason for you to have anxiety in this moment. What is going on with you? Why do you feel this way? And so then I'm able to work backwards and pull that anxiety out of me and be like, look, there's nothing going on. There's no threat. There's nothing happening right now. There's no reason to be anxious. And I'm able to work through that. That was just a moment that, I had where I was finally aware of what was going on. In the past, I could have felt that and just given into it and gone with it because that was part of the subconscious programming. But I was becoming conscious of the unconscious. Does that make sense? You following with me with what I'm saying there, right? You have to do the same thing in your life. You have to get to the point where you start to understand that you have these subconscious programs that are running in your life that you don't necessarily even know are there. It's why you feel the way that you do. because you've practiced feeling that way for so long. We're going to talk about thinking and feeling loop here in just a second. But you've practiced this feeling for so long that it's just natural now, and you don't even think that there's something wrong with it. So if you know that you want to become somebody different, if you know that you want to change your life, go from this point A to point B, this better version of yourself, you have to become aware of everything that's going on within you. So you have to get involved with what is called this thinking and feeling loop. I got this from Dr. Joe Dispenza, where he talks about the way that you think is the way that you feel. So your thoughts drive the emotions because your thoughts are releasing chemicals into your bloodstream, which are then being passed throughout the body, and it's creating this emotion within you, this feeling within you. And as you're creating this feeling within you, that feeling then reaches back up to the brain and tells the brain, hey, I'm getting this rush of chemicals right now because I'm feeling this way. I need more of that. So what does it do? It drives the thought cycle to think more of those same thoughts, which then produce more of those same emotions, which then reach back up. It produces more of the same thoughts, more of the same emotions. This can also work in the reverse. You start to feel a certain way. You don't even realize that you're having a thought yet. But the way that you're feeling triggers that thought. When I went into that DMV and I opened up that door, I didn't have any thoughts about what was going on. Consciously, right? I opened the door and boom, I'm flooded with anxiety, which then starts the thought cycle of whatever, would correspond with that feeling of anxiety. But since I was conscious of it, I was able to catch that thought and be like, hold on, we're not going there. So it can go both ways. Thought reinforces the feeling reinforces the thought, or feeling reinforces the thought, and thought reinforces the feeling. It doesn't really matter. It's this loop that you go through. It's a cycle that you've gotten used to over a certain amount of time where you start to just believe that this is who I am. You start to think that you are this way, and you don't necessarily know why. If you're an angry person, you probably don't know why you're an angry person. You might be able to link it back to a few things. And maybe, this is what caused me to feel angry. There are some very traumatic experiences that you can have in life. People go through very traumatic experiences where they can point back and be like, that was it right there. There's a lot of people, though, you don't necessarily know. Because the experiences were these smaller situations that happened that built up over a certain period of time that you started to take and formulate into this personality that you call you. Something happened, you keep dwelling on it, you keep thinking about it, you keep allowing it to show up in your life, you ruminate on it, and then something else happens, and it just kind of keeps building on top until you get to the point where you're an angry person. You show up and people are like, hey, that's the angry guy. Well, why is he angry? I don't know. A lot of times you probably don't even know. Because of that, we have to start to understand that just because I don't necessarily know doesn't mean that I can't stop myself from going to that place. We have to be good at recognizing those emotions. We have to become good at recognizing those thought processes that we have. We have to become very adept at realizing what's going on in real time. That's why being in the present moment can be so beneficial. That's why meditation can become so beneficial, because it teaches you how to stay in the present moment. So one of the things that I want to ask here is, who do you want to become? All right, we're going to circle back to this. Who is it that you want to become? Why do you want to become that person? And what is the identity shift that you need to make in order to become that person? Do you know what that is? Do you know what the shift is? If you're dealing with depression, do you know who it is that you want to become that isn't this depressed person? If you deal with anxiety, do you know who it is that you want to become that isn't this anxious person? Because if you remove this thing from your life, something is going to come in and fill it. And you can either work on removing this thing and just allow whatever to come in, or you can remove this thing and you can go with a focused approach into cultivating and creating that person that you want to be. But you have to know who it is that you want to be. You have to know where it is that you want to go. And this doesn't mean you have to write down a, full business plan for your life. But you need to know the type of person that you want to become. Do you want to be more generous? Do you want to be more loving? Do you want to be more humble? Do you want to be just have more sense of peace in your life? In the way that you deal with everybody is just a sense of peace across the board. Because as you're working on these different emotional issues or thought issues that you have, the ruminations that are going on, you want to be able to transition those into that new identity that you're creating for yourself. And the other thing that I want you to understand is you don't have to change overnight. Just like I talked about earlier, you go to work out, you're not going to see the results on your first day. You have to understand that. You have to be willing to play the long game, even if it's going to take you a few years. Get to the point where you're okay with that. It doesn't mean that you just slack off and you're like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not really going to work on it today. I'm planning on being better in 3 years. So, I'm just not going to work on it this month. No, we don't want to do that. You want to continue to work on it, but give yourself the amount of time that you need. If you give yourself 3 years and you really work on it every day, I guarantee you it's not going to take 3 years. Probably won't even take a year. But how much work are you willing to do? How often are you willing to stay in control of your thoughts, to continually think and be aware of what's going on, so that when the thoughts come up that start to lead you down into that programming that you are used to running, that subconscious program that you're used to running, how conscious are you going to be of that so that you can catch it as many times as possible, as many times as needed, and shift that focus to that person that you do want to become. So don't think about this as being an overnight thing. Don't think about this as, well, I'm going to give it 2 weeks, and if it doesn't work in 2 weeks, I'm done. I'm going to give it a month. If it doesn't work in a month, I'm done. Don't limit yourself to such a short time frame. I do believe that you can overcome a lot of the different issues that you have within a shorter amount of time as opposed to a longer amount of time. But again, it goes back to how much are you willing to stay on top of your thoughts and emotions, to catch them when they're arising? How much work and energy are you willing to put into it? So as you go through your day, as you're going through the rest of your life, think about these ideas. Because this idea of who do you want to become doesn't necessarily have to just stay with this one moment right now. Because what you're going to find is as you overcome certain aspects of yourself, as you begin to overcome the certain emotional, issues that you might be dealing with, thought processes that you're dealing with, you're going to find that it's just one layer of the onion, and then there's another layer under there. And then when you peel that layer back, there's another layer there. You peel that one back, there's another layer there. So we can be working on this potentially for the rest of our lives, but that's okay. That's part of the human experience. That's part of living the life that we live. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that we're not going to get to this place where we feel peace and joy and love, because I feel way better than how I used to feel when I was trapped in that cycle of depression and anxiety. I mean, so much better. I probably to the point right now where I'm like, I could just coast the rest of my life and not worry about anything else. Because I feel so much better about life in the things that I'm doing and how I'm relating to people. But I know that there are things within myself that I still want to change or fix so that I can become a better person. And I know that when I become a better person, it changes the dynamics and the scenarios around me. It changes how I relate to people, how I think about people, how I think about the problems in my life, the struggles that I might be going through. It changes my relationship with all of those things. And since I've seen that, now I have a drive to continually work on becoming a better version of myself, because I know that the more work that I'm doing, the better life is going to be overall. The easier life is going to become, even in the midst of struggles, even in the midst of hardships. I'm still going to be able to flow through in a easier manner. And so I'm continually working on myself and trying to change and tweak little aspects. It's becoming this lifelong venture that I'm on. So, that's kind of up to you and how you want to move forward. But I almost feel like when you start to do some of this work, you start to see the changes, you start to realize, wow, where can I go with this? Like, what's possible? How much peace can I actually have in life? How much love can I actually experience? How much joy can I actually experience? And so I just challenge you to start working on this today. Start getting to the point where you are no longer satisfied with the status quo, with your homeostasis, which is the life that you're currently living. Even if you feel like you have a good life, what else can you do to make it better? Not necessarily just so that you have a better life, but because of the fact that when you start to have a better life, the people around you have better experiences as well. So what is it that you can do today? Ask yourself, who do you want to become? Take time to really think about that. Maybe write it down and get to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm going to start working on this. I'm no longer going to allow myself to continue to stay stuck or trapped in whatever dismal place I might be, with whatever struggles I'm having. Because you might feel good overall, but there are certain areas where you're like, this thing is just so frustrating. You know what? I'm not going to let it frustrate me. Well, what is that thing? Deal with it. Figure out how to deal with it. What do you need to do? Do you need to go internally and deal with that thing? So I just challenge you to do that. If you enjoyed today's episode, first of all, I would like to say thank you for watching or listening. The second thing I would like to do is ask you for a huge favor. And that is for you to like the video, comment on the video, subscribe or follow my channel, and probably most importantly, share with your social network so that together we can work on changing the world and making it a better place. Again, thank you for watching or listening, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.